presidential lecture and also Mirsha, because they have covered a lot of the areas that I'm going to talk about, so made my job easier. So I'm going to talk about prediction of pigmentation in ancient DNA samples and looking at it as a survey through time and space. And a bit of background, I am part of the research consortium called Candela. It's based in 5 different Latin American countries, but run from UCL, and the principal investigator, Andres Luis Linares, was my postdoc boss when I joined this cohort. And it's a convenience sample and primarily an admixture between 3 different ethnicities, Native Americans, Europeans, and Africans, with about 9,000 participants and with genotype data and imputed data. So using this data, we have done many different analyses, primarily GWAS, but also looking at signals of natural selection and population genetics, so on. And this is a map showing the different areas, and just to show how it's a convenient sample, we are primarily sampling, for example, from southern Brazil, where is a lot of European immigration, but not from other parts of Brazil, where it's ethnically more diverse. And we have a few different sets of pigmentation phenotypes. You can see on the top, we have quantitatively measured skin pigmentation, and we also have categorical and quantitative eye color. So categorical eye color in these different categories. These are not self-reported by assessed by a person, and we also have quantitative eye color extracted from images, and they show a gradient of brightness. And we also have hair color. So these are the 3 different pigmentation aspects that we studied in Candela. And as I was mentioning, it's a 3-way admixture with primarily Native American, European, and African ancestries in different proportions in these different countries. Of course, this being a convenience sample, might have been differently sampled from other locations. So a few notes on the phenotype itself. So pigmentation, as we all know, is not Mendelian, but still some variants have large effects. And overall pigmentation is quite a highly heritable trait. And we say that it's polygenic in contrast to other traits like height or BMI, which are probably omnigenic with thousands of variants with small effect sizes. So in this aspect, pigmentation is probably a trait that is easier to predict. And it also has massive geographical and ethnic variability. And because of that, it has ancestry-specific variants in different ethnicities, so variants which are only seen in one ethnicity but not the other. So when we did the pigmentation GWAS in Candela, we got some really big GWAS hits, but also several other small hits. And if we just look at the SNP, you get some of the more usual suspects like the SLCs. And just to show how shared the genetic architecture of all the pigmentation traits is, most of the genes are related to all the phenotypes, but some genes are unique to specific phenotypes. And one aspect that we highlight is that if you move to a quantitative phenotype from a categorical one, you end up getting more hits, so you end up getting more power for the same sample size. So with this Candela GWAS data in mind, we were looking into non-European genetic variation, because you know that most global databases are like UK Biobank are primarily consisting of European ethnicity people. So when we looked at Candela, by that time it was, so when we started in 2010, it was one of the largest GWAS cohorts, but soon after all these biobanks started to come out, and we were completely outplayed in terms of sample size and therefore in terms of power. But still, we had this capability of looking at some unique genetic variants like this MFSD12 gene. In fact, there was almost at the same time another paper finding unique MFSD12 variants in Africans that this particular variant is only seen in East Asians and Native Americans. And we showed that the allele frequency has a strong correlation with solar radiation. So kind of validating indirectly the hypothesis that solar radiation might have to do something with evolution of pigmentation. And that was part of the reason why we said in our paper that there's probably an independent evolution of light skin in East Asians due to genetic variants that are different from those that in Europeans. So in summary, pigmentation traits are unique, and the evolution of skin color follows a geographic trend and shows a relationship with solar radiation following the evolutionary history. So that was the basics of Candela. Then after the GWAS, we carried that forward into prediction for modern humans. So that was a paper that we published in Forensic Science Genetics. So we constructed some SNP sets, and this is similar to the state-of-the-art forensic tool that is HiRespect, and that uses a fixed set of SNPs and a particular model to predict pigmentation phenotypes. And this is different to a lot of other predictions like height, like Thomas was talking about yesterday, where we go for a more genome-wide polygenic risk score TRS kind of approach. And we looked at our GWAS hits. We followed sort of a stepwise model looking at how many SNPs we can include. And initially, prediction accuracy goes up and then it goes down. So we sort of take the optimal case and we take that set of SNPs as our prediction set of SNPs. So the idea is that different worldwide populations, if they have their sample genotype for these SNPs, they can use that as a forensic tool to predict phenotypes. So when we tested various statistical models, we saw that the basic models like regression is working the best, actually even better than random forest, which is in generally quite a good model. And also when we train our model on our own data set, it's doing better than the HiRespect SNP set, even if we train it on our data. And it's doing even better if you just use the online HiRespect set tool. And probably a reason is that although it's trained in a diverse ethnicity, it's still primarily trained on European samples. So this was to show that our prediction model works reasonably well overall, but when we look closely into non-European ethnicities, for example, in this bin we have samples with high native ancestry and low European ancestry. We see that our method, the blue one, is giving almost double the prediction accuracy as HiRespect, again showing that our model is probably better for non-European ethnicities. So sort of an indirect validation again was correlation of solar radiation with various native samples that our project and other projects collected. We don't have phenotypes measured directly on these people, so the indirect validation of our prediction was predicting the phenotype, correlating it with solar radiation, and showing that our predictions have a much higher correlation than predictions from HiRespect sets. So after we did that, I was approached by a BBC journalist who said that, well, most people here in the UK work with white people, but found out that you work with non-white people. So we have a presenter, not going to tell you his name or his identity, but he's of mixed ethnicity. So here's a challenge for you. You have to predict his appearance, and then we'll show on the program how accurate your prediction is. So we did all the ethics and consent paperwork, and then when I did the prediction, it was quite easy. I could say with very high certainty that this person would have black hair, for example, and black eyes and so on. And then they reveal on the program that the person indeed is of mixed African heritage and it has dark hair and dark eye color. So that was good validation for our work for a general audience. Then, in summary, our prediction for modern samples, we built a simple additive linear regression model using the top SNPs identified in our GWAS. We trained it on our admixed Candela samples, maximizing the prediction R-square, and it gives at least similar performance to HiRespect sets globally and better performance for non-European ethnicities, and we validate the sort of the geographic and solar trend that we see. So then we carried it forward, applying it to ancient DNA, and we cheated a bit. We did not have the resource to generate our own ancient DNA data. We're not doing any ancient DNA project, so we took the Allen ancient DNA resource that is publicly available, and then we classified it to geographic regions, and we tried to make our predictions on this. Now, of course, the big challenge is that most ancient DNA data is low coverage and is therefore haploid with many missing SNPs. So if we had a SNP set prepared from Candela, maybe 95% of the SNPs are missing for a particular sample. And also, they are often genotyped from specific areas, like the 1240K, and then we have to check the overlap with those areas. So, modern data, there is a trade-off between data size in terms of the number of samples we can work with and the number of SNPs that we need to keep. So the missing it. So we see that if we have a sort of a high R-squared threshold that we need to keep in the model, then we only retain probably 100 SNPs. But if we allow for poorer predictions and have lower R-squared prediction threshold, then we can use probably up to 4,000 samples. So there's a sweet spot in between that we went for. So we can still have enough samples to talk about global trends, but also enough reliability in our prediction. So initially, we extended our prediction model from Candela a bit to the worldwide model sample because, of course, the Latin American cohort is not sufficient for worldwide prediction, for example, in South Asia. But the Candela cohort contained some smaller proportion of more recent immigrations from different parts of the world, like East Asia, into Latin America. So we selected those samples and upweighted their contribution. But also we collected some other participants from various worldwide ethnicities so that we built a better training set for this. And then we used that for prediction in model samples like South genomes and HGTP. We then extended it further for ancient samples. And to address the difficulty that this is haploid, we convert our data into pseudo-haploid, randomly do it many times and take the average prediction. And that is applied to both ancient and modern data, and wanted to see how much the prediction in modern samples change if we make everyone pseudo-haploid. But also there's that issue of missingness. So because every ancient sample is unique in terms of the number of things actually genotyped on, so we actually had to train our models separately for every ancient sample, just taking those same set of SNPs from the Candela data and preparing our model. And then we set a threshold of prediction R-squares if our cross-validated training R-squares at least 10%, then only we use that ancient sample in our analysis. And this is an important point that we were not looking into individual predictions, but trends, geographic, spatial, and temporal trends. So when we did that on the model samples, we had this kind of a prediction map. So as expected, Europeans were predicted to be lighter skinned, and Africans and other equatorial populations were predicted to be darker skinned. So at least this was working reasonably okay for model samples. And then again for model samples, when we look at various worldwide populations from 1,000 genomes and HGTP, and if we compare our predictions with average values, which is the yellow line from the samples that we collected from those ethnicities, then we said that the predictions are reasonably close and at least show a similar trend between dark, light, and so on, even if there's a bit of bias. And as expected, if we convert the modern samples to pseudo-haploid, the bias increases a bit, but there is still the same trend. So we thought this is useful enough. And when we do the correlation of predicted pigmentation with latitude, we see the similar trend as we saw in our previous analysis. It's a very strong correlation. The correlation drops a little bit for pseudo-haploid model samples, but it's still good enough. So with that in mind, then we went ahead and tried to predict on these ancient samples looking through time and space. So this is the earliest samples from the cohort, mostly Denisova and Neanderthal samples, and they are predicted to be very dark. Now there's a caveat to that, I'll come later. But then as you then move to time, then it starts to get a little bit lighter in the European areas. We of course don't have any ancient DNA coverage in most of other parts of the world. But then if you skip a few years and then come to 5,000, 50,000 years, you see that Europe is starting to have some light skin, again as expected. This is nothing normal really. And then if you come to less than 2,000 years old samples, you see a very clear trend of skin lightening in Europe, also in certain parts of East Asia, but not as strongly as Europe. And in general, you also get lots more samples. So this was the temporal trend we were looking at, and it sort of validates what we already know. But if you look more specifically in Europe, and if you look across time periods, you see this consistent trend in all parts of Europe towards a general lightening of the skin. So lower values is lighter, higher values darker. And this again is what you would expect, even if you look at really the big effect single SNP polymorphisms and just look at their early frequencies, which people have done already. But East Asia and North America has not been studied so much, and when we look at East Asia again, we have different locations like Siberia, and we see sort of a trend. Initially goes down, but then sort of stabilizes. And also, if you look at the Americas, so once people started migrating there about 15,000 to 20,000 years, is the earliest sample, we see that they are already similar to East Asian samples from that period, and there is no further substantial change, either lightening or darkening. So we were expecting maybe people who migrated close to the equator might have darkened a bit, but we don't really see that to be the case. I mean, there is a small increase in Caribbean, but it's not statistically significant enough to conclude. So there is no major trend post-migration in Asian Americans. So several limitations to our approach. One is, as we saw yesterday, a lot of people like Dumas and Ian Mathieson, they are predicting height using these PRS-based methods. And of course, that is one thing where we have direct validation. So you can measure the length of the femur bones of the ancient samples, and you can correlate that with height, and you can correlate that with skeletal height and with overall height. And it's a nice way to validate your prediction, but of course we don't have any pigmentation information for ancient samples, so we were using very indirect methods like correlation with solar radiation to validate our findings, but also our general knowledge about global distribution of modern pigmentation as well. Now, second limitation is about unknown variants. As Misha was pointing out yesterday, there are a lot of global variation that is not well studied. For example, the Melanesian light-haired variant, which is unique to that region and is not represented in Candela, not represented in most data sets. So if we had a person from Melanesia, we were applying this model, our prediction would be completely wrong. So we admit that. And the second thing we admit is that quite possibly past samples, especially distant ones like Neanderthals and Denisovans, probably had their own variants, and a lot of people think that because Neanderthals were spending so much time in higher latitudes, maybe they evolved their own light skin markers, and we just don't know about them because we didn't inherit them. So some functional prediction of ancient DNA sequences, finding out possible mutations that might have caused light skin might be useful, and if someone does that, then we can maybe incorporate that into our model in some way. But so far it's quite restricted. And therefore, although it is possible, like in this case of Cheddarman, there's this very famous prediction of dark skin but light eyes. And it's possible, given our models, to make these kind of predictions for individual samples. Sometimes we have quite high prediction R-squared because we have good coverage and therefore we can make good predictions. But oftentimes it's not as accurate, like R-squared.
Dr. Adhikari, can you please conclude?
Sure.
So that we can have some discussion.
Sure.
Summarize.
So this is a reason why instead of looking at individual people, we're looking at broad trends. And this is my summary slide that we find prediction trends that are consistent with what we know, and we use various validations like global patterns and correlation with solar radiation to validate our method because we don't have direct validation. And this is my acknowledgement. The work was done primarily through researchers in Marseille, but of course Candela, UCL, Open University, and so on.
Thank you, Dr. Adhikari. You have done that. Any discussions, please? Yeah.
So, really wonderful one. So, when you are looking at your models, so can you trace back what the models are really looking for to classify or to basically predict in modern versus ancient DNA? Are they mapping to the same gene sets, or do they actually map over different genes? Just curiosity, because